Photos of people are kind of the one thing that people ask me a lot about. And so today what we're going to do is take a look at how we can edit a photo of a person or a portrait inside of ON1 Photo RAW and get a really nice professional look without having to dive deep into very complicated tools. This video is sponsored by Reblum, which is an AI-powered skin retouching software, but more on them a little bit later. Now let's go ahead and jump into ON1 Photo RAW and take a look at how we can edit a portrait. Here we are inside of ON1 Photo RAW, and if you're an Academy member, you have access to this RAW file as well as the session file, and if you'd like to join, there's a link in the description box below. Now, the first thing that we want to do whenever we have a photo, and this is going to be a demonstration on a RAW file. JPEGs will be a little bit different, and I'll try my best to call that out, but just know that everything that I'm showing is with the intention of working on a RAW file. So first thing we want to do is come up to our levels section. So if you're on any other tab, just make sure that you jump over to the levels tab. This is going to give you the histogram. We're going to go ahead and click on either one of these little triangles in the upper left corner. These are our clipping indicators. And what this does is it tells us when we're losing information and it is essentially destroying the file, or the file is not going to print well. It's very important if you want to print, not as important if you only want to keep this on social media or on your iPhone or something of that sort. Nonetheless, check them. It's going to be helpful for the next step. So we're going to go ahead and click on Brilliance AI. Now, I have my Brilliance AI tuned, and it typically gives me a really good starting point, but I still need to tweak it. Now, if you're interested in how I have Brilliance AI tuned, check the description box below, and you'll get instructions on how I actually do that. But I'm not going to spend too much time explaining it. I'm just going to go ahead and minimize this and jump into the tone and color. Now, here inside of tone and color, we have a few choices to make. The first one, again, is only for RAW files, and that's the camera profile. Essentially what this does is it tells ON1 how to treat the RAW file in order to give kind of a base of the tone and the color that you want ON1 to read. Now, you should definitely explore all of these camera profiles, but because today is more about editing the portrait and not all of the bells and whistles of ON1, I'm just going to go ahead and jump down to ON1 Portrait because I think that this one works the best for this particular file. You'll have to explore all of the other ones to identify one that works the best for your images. Now, once we have that selected, we can minimize camera profile because we don't really need to do anything more with it. Now, when I like to edit in the develop module, I like to work in kind of a three-step process. The first one is modify the light. The second step is to modify color. And then the third step is to modify texture or increase the structure. And so we're going to go ahead and start with the light portion of the develop module, and that's going to be located inside of tone. Now, I will give a quick disclaimer. If the color information is confusing you or it's distracting you, then it is wise to click on color and just remove all of the saturation from the image. Sometimes I like to do this because it makes it easier for me to see the bright values from the dark values, as well as the contrast overall in the image. And then also, it helps me see when I'm clipping, it just jumps off of the black and white photo. So it's very helpful if you are going to do that. Now, we're going to go ahead and click on tone, and I am going to reset the exposure because Brilliance AI, it always touches the exposure or very often. And I don't necessarily like to move my exposure slider. So I'm going to double click here, and right away, I'm starting to get a little bit of that highlight recovery from the cup there that I'm losing. And so after I have my exposure reset, I like to set my dynamic range, which is the darkest pixel to the brightest pixel. And that's essentially giving ON1 boundaries to work in when it comes to tone. All right. And so to do that, what I'm going to do is come down to my blacks, and I like to pull this all the way down, or at least until I start to see this blue overlay, which is telling me when I'm losing that information. Again, this is important if you're trying to print. Not as important if it's going to live on social media or any form of digital platform. All right. But I'm going to go ahead and pull this back until it gets to about here, because now I'm not seeing any of that clipping happening on my file. Then I'm going to go ahead and increase the whites until I start to see that clipping indication, which I'm getting it here on the cup as well as here inside of her blouse and on her bracelet. And so I'm not looking at the slider because I don't want to adjust sliders. I want to adjust the photo. And I'm looking at the photo and I'm just pulling this down until I see those red indicators go away. And right around here looks about right. Now, that isn't always where it ends up. That's just where it ends up for this particular image. And so now what I need to do is adjust my highlights and my shadows. And so if I pull down on the highlights, I could probably recover the clipping indications that were on this bracelet, which may have been hard to see. So we'll just go ahead and reset these highlights. And as I pull down on the highlights, I want you to watch what happens in this little bracelet area here. So we'll just go ahead and start pulling those down. And again, I'm just looking at the image to remove that information, or at least recover that information in the highlight area. Now, this doesn't look the most contrasted, and I like my images to be a little bit more contrasty. And so what I need to do, I think, is pull down on the shadows. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab the shadow slider and start pulling that down. And now I'm starting to reintroduce some of that contrast. And I really like what I'm getting here. Now, the challenge is the photo looks a little dark, all right? And that's because we did kind of kill all of the light in the image by pulling down the whites, pulling down the highlights, and neutralizing the exposure earlier. And so what I need to do is bring back some brightness. Now, the tool that I like to use for that is midtones. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull that to the right. And traditionally, or systematically speaking, whenever I pull the shadows down, I typically pull my midtones up. And whenever I pull my shadow slider up, I pull my midtones down. It's not always, but that's kind of the general rule of thumb for me. So maybe somewhere around here looks right. And this is all subjective, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time fiddling around with it. I think that I have the light exactly where I want it. And so now it's time to move into that second phase, which is modifying the color. So we're going to come down here to the color section. Let's just minimize tone for a second, open up color. And the first thing that I need to do if I'm working on the black and white or the non-saturated version is I need to put the color back in. And so the way that I do this is I just double click the saturation and then I take a look at the white balance. Now, if you're not familiar with white balance, don't worry about it. Essentially, you could look at it one of two ways, right? You can do the technical correction where you're just making the image look like it did on the day, or you can do a creative correction where you make the image look a little cooler or a little warmer. Now, I'm going to do a combination of both because in the scenario for this particular image, there was mixed lighting. There was overhead lighting as well as a orange, I guess we'll call it a mood light, if you will. And so I need to modify that just a little bit. In order to do that, what I'm going to do is come over here to this white balance section where there's a little drop down. And when I click that, I'm just going to click on as shot. Now, ON1 didn't really do a whole lot, but what it allows me to do is to take this color picker and I can click anywhere on her blouse, which was white, or at least pretty close to white. And so I'll click there, and that gets me roughly to how the eye was seeing the colors on the day, roughly. All right. Now, if it gets a little too blue, then this is where you can start working with that temperature slider to either warm it up just a touch, maybe to about there, or maybe I want it to be a little bit cooler. And so I can pull it to the left just a little bit. Now, a little really does go a long way when it comes to the white balance adjustment. And so use it wisely and cautiously. All right. But really, when you shoot in RAW, you can reset your white balance to whatever you want it to be. And that's kind of the benefit of being able to do it. And so after I have my white balance established, which again, I think this is a little too cool, so we'll warm it up just a touch, maybe around here. It gives that diner feel. I don't know. You tell me what you think about it in the comment section below. Now, the next step is really working with the saturation. And so now that I know that my white balance is good, what I'm going to do is just remove all of the saturation one more time. And this time, I'm looking at the photo as I pull up on the saturation to reintroduce the color into the image. And what I'm looking for is a punchy, nice and saturated tone over the overall photo. And so I don't really care what the numbers are on the slider as much as I care about how the photo looks. And so I, in this case, pulled it up to positive 21. I don't always get that far. But today I did, because that was kind of the look that I wanted for this image. And so after that, I get to work on the vibrance. And if you're not familiar with vibrance, what it does is it takes the less saturated colors in the photo and it just pulls them up a little bit and gives the image an overall color pop. It's really nice. I like to use it. You don't have to, but I'm going to use it here. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull the vibrance slider up to maybe somewhere around here. That just gives all the colors a nice little punch, and I really do like that. The problem is I don't really care for what it's doing to her skin. So I'm going to go ahead and click on reduce vibrance on skin, and you'll notice if I turn this off and on, let me just zoom in so it's a little bit easier to see. So if I have it off, her skin is really orange and red, but if I turn it on, then her skin, it just becomes a little bit more of a natural skin tone. And I like that. All right. And so we're going to go ahead and zoom out, and we'll call this good for the tone and the color. Now I need to work on the texture. Now, again, the way that I do that inside of the develop module is with structure. There's multiple ways of doing this. You could use other tools, but today we're keeping it simple and only working in the develop module for getting the established look of a portrait. And so this is where the structure slider really does come in handy. I'm just going to go ahead and pull up on the structure. Now, this far out and probably over YouTube compression, it's not going to come through very strong. So let me just zoom in and show you what's happening here. So right now I'm at 51 on the structure. If I pull this all the way up, you can see it really starts to define all of the edges. And as I pull this down, you can see it just gets softer. Now, I haven't met a RAW file that can't use a little bit of structure. All right. Depending on I guess the feel that you want for your image, it could be different. But for me, I typically like to add just a little bit of structure to my photos, and it really does help make the overall photo look nice and aesthetic. So I like what structure has done here, and that's really the easiest thing out of this entire process of modifying light, color, and texture. Now, let's take a look at the before. This is straight out of camera. I did shoot it underexposed, and I also I was shooting this handheld, so I needed to make sure that I had a fast enough shutter speed. So that's the reason why it's underexposed. But if I show you the after, we've brightened up the image. We've also cleaned it up. And yes, I'm going to leave the noise in this particular photo because I like the film aesthetic for the look overall. You could absolutely use no noise AI at this point if that's something that you wanted to do, but I'm not going to worry about that. But the next step that I'm going to do here is lens correct. So if I go ahead and expand this by clicking on the text and then clicking the little circle to turn on the actual lens correction, you'll see that it just gets rid of a very, very small vignette. So I'm probably not even going to worry about it. But typically this is where in my workflow, I start to do the lens correction. All right. So for this photo, I'm just going to leave it turned off because it's not really doing much of anything. So now that I have a really good base image, I am ready to move on to the next step, which is skin retouching. And that brings us to our sponsor for today, which is Reblum, AI-powered skin retouching software that works as a plugin inside of ON1 Photo RAW. Let me show you how to activate it. After you install it, you'll come up to Layer, and then you'll come down to Filter, and you'll come to Reblum, and then Reblum Retouch. Once Reblum loads up, the interface is very simple to use. Over here on the right side, we have a navigation window where if you zoom in, it just gives you a little box that you can move around and reframe the photo so you can see where exactly you're working. Now, where the meat and potatoes of this particular tool come in are really inside of the style and the fine-tune sections. Now, these sections are pretty simple to use. You only have two styles to choose from, which is natural and fashion. And I love that it's just that simple. If you want something that's going to be natural, then obviously you're going to want to use natural. Now, if you want to go with something that's a little bit more high gloss and matte finish for like magazines and things of that sort, well, that's where you're going to end up with the fashion option. Now, for today's purposes, I'm not going to actually model the fashion one. I'm just going to go with the natural because I think natural is going to look the most appropriate for the style that I want to apply on this photo. And so if I go ahead and click on this little eye down here at the bottom, I can see the before and the after. And you'll notice that there's areas of her face that are darker and really just not as even as other portions of her face. And so when the AI activates on here, notice how it's cleaning up all of those blemishes as well as evening out the skin tone in those areas where it's a little bit darker. But this looks very realistic. This is one of those things that would take a really long time to retouch if I was to do it manually. So I really appreciate having a software that just does this for me. Now let's take a look at these two sliders. So we have general and we have texture, and I'm just going to pull them both down. Essentially, we're getting the base photo. And so if I pull up general, this is like the strength of the AI tool, and this looks amazing. And I haven't even done anything to kind of smooth out the texture in the overall photo. And so if I pull up on texture, you'll notice that it starts to smooth out like those pores just a little bit. And so if I increase this all the way up on natural, it's not really overly aggressive, which is what I appreciate about this tool. I love being able to get natural looks on an image. And so I'll just leave texture where it is and general where it is. This image looks good. And so what I can do is go ahead and hit OK. And this is going to send it back into ON1 as its own layer. Now, something you should know about Reblum is they don't use your images to train the AI because all of the components that are processing your photo are stored local to your machine, and you don't need an internet connection in order to do it. So there's no cloud that's processing the photo. So if you're looking for privacy to edit your images, then this is a tool that offers that. If you'd like to pick up Reblum, then consider using the link in the description box below. You can download a free trial, no credit card necessary, and if you enjoy it, then you can save 20% using the exact same link on either the subscription or the lifetime license. Now, when you purchase a lifetime license, you will receive updates for the life of the software. So thank you, Reblum, and let's go ahead and jump right back into editing our photo. So now that we have our photo back from Reblum, if I turn off the top layer here, you can see that's our original image that we sent to Reblum. And here is our after image coming out of Reblum. And it's time to really start modifying this image. So we'll come over to local, and I'm just going to minimize our layers because we don't need that anymore. And we'll zoom into her face, and I want to keep things really, really subtle and simple. So when it comes to working with portraits, you could do a number of things, but for today's sake, we're just going to keep it simple. All right. First thing that we want to do is make her eyes a little bit more present. The way that I like to do that is by using a brush tool. So we'll grab the brush, and then I have a style that I use. So if I click more, and then I have the FWP eye details. Now, if you're interested in this particular brush, go ahead and comment down below and I will leave the settings. But if you'd like, you can also pause the video right here and I'll leave the actual brush settings available for you. So if you want to make this for yourself, then you can absolutely do that. But now that we have that going, then we are going to make our brush size just a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to paint right over her eyes. And I want to be like mindful of where I'm putting this, which is right inside of the eyes. I don't necessarily want to go over her eyelids. I just want this on the inside of her eyes. All right. And so if we hit Command and 0 to zoom out, I think that this is like over baked right now. And the way that I tell is by turning it off and then turning it on. And so I think that they just don't match the overall lighting of what we have in the photo. And so what I'm going to do is grab the opacity slider. I'm going to pull it all the way down, and I'm just looking at the eyes as I pull this up until they get more present. And you know, right around 46 seems to be doing the trick. So if I turn this off and turn it on, the eyes just light up a little bit more. Now, the model's expression, you know, portraits are all about expression. And I love real emotion on the face. We don't have any emotion on the face here today, but that is what it is. And so what we're going to do now is kind of direct the viewer's eye into the actual model. All right. And so the way that I like to do that is just shaping the light around the model. And that means the background, because the background, I mean, it's just a blue sheet. Your background may be a little bit different. So don't worry if this isn't entirely perfect for your photo, but that's okay. We're going to go ahead and click the background button here. And this is going to load in a local adjustment for the background. And this is new inside of Photo RAW 2026 specifically. So just keep that in mind. But what I can do is just pull down on the exposure. Now, the reason why I like to do it this way is if I make the background darker, she naturally becomes brighter. And we focus, or the viewer's eyes will always focus on the thing that is brightest in the frame. And I want our subject to be that bright thing in the frame. So that's the reason why I'm doing it that way. Now, the next thing that you can do with portraits is really start to pull out details that would otherwise be faded into the background. So one of the things that we can pull out are details in the hair. And so let's go ahead and create a new brush. And I'm just going to open up the shadows quite a bit, and then we'll just back it off. And so what I'm going to do is select the subject by clicking the subject mask. And so now I've opened up the shadows essentially over the entire subject, except for it did not, because I clicked the wrong button, but that's life. All right, so now I've opened the shadows over the entire subject. Well, I only want this in the hair. And so what I'm going to do is come to masking. I'm going to hit the plus icon here. And then I'm going to click on, we'll go with a brush, and I'll go with subtract for right now. But what I really want is intersect. And so I'm going to come up here to the brush again, hit the 3-line menu, and then come down to mode and click on intersect. Now, if you're not familiar with what intersect does, that's okay. Just know that when you paint using intersect on a mask that looks like this, watch what happens. White is where all of our adjustment is going, and black is where none of the adjustment is going. But as soon as I start to paint, look at how I am only getting the adjustment in the area where I painted, but I can paint over the edge here, and I'm not going to include anything that's in the background. And that's the power of intersect. Essentially, where the two masks overlay with one another, that's where the adjustment will be applied. And so if I press the letter O, you'll notice that I'm only getting the shadow brightening or the shadow increase over the hair. Now, I think that's a little too much because it's starting to make the hair look a little different color. So we'll just go ahead and increase this just a little bit to right around here, I think is fair. And so now the hair has a little bit more definition to it. We can even increase the structure to really give the hair some definition, but it doesn't have to be a whole lot. All right. And so the next thing is probably shaping just a little bit of the light on the subject, because the light is coming from the right side here, and we can kind of see that because the left side of our subject is a little bit darker. And so we're going to do a similar trick where we're going to select the subject, and then I'm going to increase the exposure just a little bit. This is the only time that I use the exposure slider, by the way, when I want to increase the exposure on our subject. And then what I'm going to do is come up to masking. I'm going to hit the plus icon to the right side of mask layers, and I'm going to add in a gradient mask. And then I'm going to hit subtract, because what I want to do is remove the gradient from the right side of the image. And what this does, or I'm sorry, from the left side of the image. And what this does is it helps amplify the light, but gives a very natural fall off. And because the left side is the shadow side of the photo, this is going to work out just fine. And so if I increase this, you'll notice that her right side gets brighter, but the left side doesn't. And then what I'll do is I will also desaturate this just a little bit on the right side, because things that are typically brighter, they lose saturation. And then I'll also contrast it and maybe even give her a little bit of structure on the right side, just because things that are brighter are typically in focus a little bit more. Not always, but makes sense. So what we'll do is turn this off and then turn it back on. Now, that is like way too powerful. So we're going to grab the opacity slider, pull it all the way down, and then slowly pull it up until the light starts to look more interesting. All right. Now, the last thing that we'll do for this particular image is clean up that background. Look at all of those wrinkles. You're probably wondering, like, well, Chris, how in the heck do you clean up the background? Two ways. One, you could just replace the background, but we're not going to do that. And today, what we're going to do is just use the retouch brush. So if you come over to the left side of ON1, there's going to be a little Band-Aid for me, but you may have two circles. Either way, it's going to be the third grouping from the bottom. There's a whole bunch of tools inside of this one little section. And so I like to call this like my retouch group, because this has the healing brush, the retouch brush, and then of course, if you want to use the generative erase brush and all that stuff, it's all inside of this one little area. But I only want to use the retouch brush. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and paint over these wrinkles in the photo, and the retouch brush is going to do the rest. And so I'll fast forward through all this because it's pretty straightforward and kind of boring to watch. All right, so through the power of video editing, I was able to fast forward through some of the more boring aspects of watching me retouch the backdrop, but you can see it looks a lot cleaner now, and I really, really enjoy this. So to finish this off, what we'll do is come over to Effects and add in a vignette by clicking Add Filter, come down to Vignette. We'll throw on a big softy, And then I'm just going to go ahead and pull up on the brightness because I don't need it to be all that bright. We can do something like that. And so here is, let's come over to our layers because we are working with the layer now. And we'll turn off the top one. Just bear with me. We'll come here and we'll come to snapshots. Let's just create this one as base so that way we don't lose it. And then we'll click original so that way we can see exactly where we started. All right. So we've come a very, very long way with this photo. And if I turn on the final version, this is where we are. This is where we started, and this is where we ended. So hopefully you found some value in today's video. If you did, smash the like button. If you're interested in learning more about using ON1 Photo RAW, consider signing up for a training call with me. A link for that can be found in the description box below. Until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.